Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
What's the actual nature of ghosts? Do, quote, electronic voice phenomena, unquote, actually convey the voices of dead people? Can ghost hunting be dangerous?
Hello and welcome to the 80th edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. I am Ben, and we are coming to you live from WOON AM and FM radio in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, on the Paranormal Radio app, from TalkStream Live, and on TuneIn.com. I'm Ben, and those capricious questions came from my co-host, partner in Paranormal Adventures, and dad, Paul. And today we bring you two new guests to tackle some of the oldest questions about the supernatural. And if you'd like to join us on the air, you can give us a call, 401-766-1240. That's from anywhere, or you can email Paul at behindtheparanormal.com.
Pamela Nance and Ashley Field are a mother-stepdaughter paranormal research team with, one could say, some rather haunting parallels with Ben and myself. I even think we're roughly the same ages. I don't know. Pamela is an archaeologist and anthropologist by training, with additional degrees in religion and sociology. She is retired from Wake Forest University School of Medicine following a 30-year career in public health and biostatistical sciences and clinical trial research. Gee, I think they would have reactivated you at this point with what's going on. Anyway, she was also a seasoned investigator in the survival of consciousness after death, a trained healing touch practitioner, past life regressionist, and hypnotherapist. I have a special question on that hypnotherapist aspect, too. Her stepdaughter, Ashley, began working with Pamela while still a teenager. Her career has evolved from the illegal field in information technology to a partnership in a construction firm specializing in historical renovation. Her research has led to many areas, including past life regression, holistic healing, demonology, ghosts, mainstream and pagan religious beliefs, quantum physics, and ET phenomena and contact. Pamela and Ashley have presented their findings to dozens of professional and student groups, including the Rhine Research Center and Institute for Parapsychology at Duke University, Durham, North Carolina. They have appeared on the Discovery Channel, A&E, and the Travel Channel, and produced a 2014 documentary entitled Dead History. The team has appeared in a number of radio and TV engagements, as well as numerous newspaper articles. They both live in the American Southeast.
So Pamela Nance and Ashley Field, welcome to Behind the Paranormal.
Thank you. It's nice to be here today.
Well, it's great to have you. And
took us a while to get you, but you're here today, so that's what counts.
Yeah. Exactly. So I guess we'll start off right at the very beginning. It seems that both of you were drawn to paranormal work through personal experiences. So Pamela, let's begin with you. In brief, what happened?
Well, I pretty much had a lifetime of paranormal experiences, beginning as a young child with the typical ghostly encounters that a lot of people experience as a child, unusual noises, shadow figures, those types of things, and quite a traumatic event around the age of 10, where a couple of beings were in my room one night, and I'm quite certain it was not a dream. And so just a lifetime of encountering, otherworldly phenomena, including out-of-body experiences, a near-death experience in my early 30s, and just always sort of on the outside looking in at a normal world and not feeling at all normal. So that's pretty much been the way of my life, experiencing unusual events.
Okay, Pam, I should say Ashley?
Mine started when I was 7. We moved to the house that actually the room Pam's sitting in is my old bedroom. And every night I would wake up and I would hear footsteps around the end of my bed. The lights would come on, go off, doors would open and shut. The house was extremely active. I was really fortunate because my parents encouraged me to read up, study up, and investigate what was going on around me. They never discredited anything I said. They're actually both were believers. My father's still alive, but believers themselves. So I started doing the research on reincarnation and hauntings and read Chariot of the Gods and all that stuff at a young age, and just found that I kind of grew up in it. So by the time I met Pam, we both kind of had shared experiences or experiences in the paranormal that drove us to this friendship that developed just over that alone. So that's how it all started.
Okay. When did you become family? And you obviously developed interest in the paranormal separately.
I'll answer that. So when I was 7, we lived up the street from Pam. And Pam lived in a house down the street. And I actually rode my bike down to her house and stood at her screen door. And that's how we met. I don't know what drove me to do it, but that's how we met. And then when I was 27 years old, she married my father.
Oh, okay. So it took a while. All right. Okay.
We were friends for a long time before that happened. So.
All right. Before we proceed with our questions, we have a couple of questions from listeners here. We have a very loyal listener in Bogota, Colombia, Peter, and he asks some excellent questions every week. So, Ben, if you would do the honors.
Sure thing. Okey-dokey. So Peter writes to us. Please ask Pam and Ashley how we can read about their recent work. The Spirit Hunter website is down, and I couldn't find anything online more recent than 2014.
Right. We, due to us both working full-time jobs and working at the paranormal full-time, we burned ourselves out around 2016. And I was nearing the point of retirement at that point, and Ashley was looking into a new career. And so we dissolved that partnership and subsequently the website. But the paranormal is something that gets in your blood, and we've never stopped talking about it, and we do have plans to hopefully, gear back up again, maybe with a website and presentations and that type of thing once, COVID kind of relaxes its grip on the world and we can get back out and investigate. So currently, unfortunately, we don't have an active website. But we do have articles online and information if you just do a search on Spirit Hunters of the South or Paranormal Investigators, Pamela Nance or Ashley Field. They're links and YouTube, still a YouTube site, I think, right, Ashley?
There is a YouTube site. It's under AS Field, F-I-E-L-D. And that is actually what I rolled everything into when we kind of went on our hiatus from working on this all the time.
Okay, very good. Now, one of the interesting aspects, we had a conversation some months ago now before we booked you for the show, and that was pretty much involving myself, was that your theories and methods seem very similar to ours, and you arrived at them independently, of course, as we did. They resemble the theories of Jacques Vallée and some of the early pioneers, John Keel, etc. What brought you to the conclusion that ghosts in particular aren't always what they appear to be?
Well, I think we realized that early on when we conducted our very first investigation. It was in an historic building, and we received some just really great EVP, electronic voice phenomena, that indicated these beings were active and they weren't coming through as trapped, dead people. So that kind of immediately piqued our curiosity and made us, desire to learn more about these populations of people that are out there in these alternate timelines. So I think we formalized our group in about 2008, and I think by about 2010, we realized we were dealing with an interactive population. that weren't deceased. They were intelligent beings that wanted us to know about them. They were very willing to open themselves up to us, and so that's kind of how we got onto this path of interacting with energy beings rather than deceased, dead people.
Yeah, Ashley?
She talks about the deceased dead people, and the idea that all of these voices that we were recording and this information we were getting was from people trapped here in the afterlife just seemed too overwhelming to be true. And it's hard to say that, it comes down to we went in it kind of looking the same way everyone does, residual hauntings and all those things, and just trying to get information, and that lasted all of maybe one investigation. And then we started realizing what we were dealing with and realized that it was interactive. And we actually developed our methodology off of our first couple of investigations and sat down and really wrote out a methodology that worked for us, because the information that we got didn't match up with what you see on TV and what you always hear in the mainstream paranormal investigative world. It just didn't work for us because there was so much more to it. And, as we continued through it and we wrote our methodology, then we started investigating more and reading more on quantum physics and started applying those theories and realizing that there are things like the idea of a residual EVP a residual haunting makes no sense if you apply quantum theory to it. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't work. So we just really started trying to progress through and look at it from a scientific point of view and treat it as a science instead of what some people seem to treat it as.
Well, you could be describing my first experiences in the 1970s as precisely the conclusions I came to, and et cetera, just as you said. Ben, we have another question from Peter?
Oh, of course we do. So Peter continues on, where it actually kind of takes us back to the topic of EVPs. You seem to get a lot more EVPs than other investigators. What's the secret? Is your technique different?
That was quite fascinating to us in the beginning, because we had friends who were also paranormal investigators, and if they came away with a half dozen EVPs from an investigation, they were over the moon. And whereas with Ashley and I, we found that we would easily come away with 100 EVPs each, because she would run her recorder, I would run mine. She would, pick up things that I wouldn't. And so between the two of us, hundreds of EVPs per investigation. And we asked that question. We even asked the spirits, why do you come through to us? How are you able to come through? And received intelligent responses like they prepare to come through to us. But those questions also led us to the quantum theory. What is it about us that stands out to these energy beings? And we theorize that perhaps we vibrate at a different frequency than most people, maybe from being interested in this field for so long and seeking ways to expand our consciousness through meditation and hypnosis and past life regression, that we've actually elevated our vibration to a different frequency, and they can see us and hone in on us more easily, perhaps. That's pretty much what we came up with, that it's a vibrational, energetic attraction.
Yeah. I was interested in talking about your term energy beings. When you look at it, we're all really electrical, so you could say that we're all energy beings in a broad sense of the term, certainly. So I sort of relate to what you're saying there. One of the things we always ask, we tend to be kind of skeptical about EVPs, and Ben is the sound expert. That's what his degree is in, and so I'm wondering, Ben, when you have professional sound people, radio, TV, etc., they'll say they've never come up with anything odd. Although that's happened to us on our show, we've had odd things come in. When we were in CBS, there were all sorts of strange sounds and things like that. I mean, what say you on the whole EVP thing?
I feel as if, I guess to preface the statement, there's not a lot that we know about it, right? You know, I think there's all sorts of naturally occurring phenomena that could very well explain it, and then you have that kind of margin where you're not quite sure. You could dismiss some of it as pareidolia, essentially, like anything you see on mainstream TV, right? Where, you know, they're like, oh, did you hear that? And then they put a subtitle underneath something that just sounds like a gust of wind, or it just goes like, huh, and it says something to the effect of "help me" or something. So you read that subtitle, you hear "ha," and you think, oh, it's saying "help me." It's because your brain will interpret things that it doesn't understand, right? So one of the stories I always like to illustrate is when I was in college. One of my prerequisites when I finally got to real person college was I had to take a class called critical listening, and essentially the goal of the class was to understand mixing and mastering and being able to pick out very specific frequencies and say, oh, I'm going to turn that one down, and it was useful because, you know, I got a lot out of it that I didn't expect to. Mostly the understanding of a field called psychoacoustics, which is essentially the understanding of how our brain interprets sound, right? So one of the exercises we would do is my professor would put on a layer of pink noise, which is essentially all the harmonics you can hear in a sound, as opposed to white noise, which is just all the frequencies at once. Pink noise is all the harmonies at once, and he would play a sine wave, you know, the simplest sound you can hear, like a little beep, and, you know, you would have to count out how many little beeps you hear, and it would be a very specific frequency, whether it was A440 or whatever, you would pick it out, and you would have to count how many times, and so my professor would say, okay, how many people heard 6? And you raise your hand. How many people heard 7? And then he'd say, how many people heard 8? And, you know, I was the only one who heard 8, and I raised my hand, and he was like, that's your brain tricking you, because that's, you know, your brain thinks that pattern needs to be completed by putting in that fourth sound. So you think you hear it, but you didn't. It was your brain completing a pattern, because our brains love patterns. It's why we love the same 4-chord progression we hear in every pop song, because our brains love patterns, and we love to complete them because it's stimulating. And so when it comes to EVPs, right, there's that trick of the brain where we try to make sense of it, but then there's that sort of margin, like I mentioned when I prefaced, that we're not entirely sure. As someone who works in the field, I have heard my fair share of odd things, right? So, like, you know, my father's experience in our case in Pennsylvania with a tone that seemed to move around. I couldn't explain it. I asked all the questions. Was there a fridge door left open? Was there any issues with any appliances? You know, was there an amp left on from a guitar or something, right? You know, any of those things, because there's all sorts of stuff that can mess with you know, cables and circuitry, right? Like if anybody has ever played a musical instrument, specifically anything that requires an amp, and you have a stereo unbalanced cable, you know, you can pick up, you know, FM frequencies and stuff, you know, and because it vibrates the strings of your guitar, gets picked up on your pickups, and then it comes through your amp, and you say, oh, hey, I can hear whatever station from across town, because you're picking it up. So there's all sorts of things that can mess with it, and then there's that margin that I'm not sure how to explain, because the argument would be, if these are spirits or energy beings, they would need to disturb air molecules, right? Because that's how we talk, with amplitude modulation, right? Because we essentially have our vocal cords disturbing the air molecules around us, and that's how we create voices. And if there are no vocal cords, how does it disturb the air molecules, is my question. I guess that might be why it comes across as whispers and things like that.
Well, let's make that a question to Pam and Ashley. And I must say, we're not criticizing your methods. Far from it. You're two of the most refreshingly intelligent ghost researchers we've ever spoken with.
No, but it's the Socratic method, right?
Yeah.
You ask questions to get to the truth.
So how would you approach that question?
First off, can I play you something really fast?
Sure.
And you tell me if you hear anything.
Sure thing.
You hear that?
I can.
I can too, yeah.
Okay. That's one of many EVPs that came out of a house in Clemens, North Carolina, that would have been Civil War. It was sat on the road that went to Salisbury. So Stoneman was the other general that was coming down the interior while Sherman was going down basically the coast heading to Savannah, and he came through there. That was one of many that kind of proved that we found a blockade that we never knew, that no one has ever documented. But we knew that Union troops had been there at that house by the things we got. The EVP I just played you is Halt, Aim for His Heart, and the other one that came from it, I don't know how well you can hear it over my speakers.
It's clearly a voice, yeah.
Yeah. That's the kind of stuff we get. So we really, when we go through and review our audio, there's a lot of stuff that never makes it in, because if it doesn't make enough sense and we can't really peg what it is, we don't use it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, we look back at our... no, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ashley.
But I like the idea that you're asking how the voices are coming through, because you're moving air when you speak. So you're talking about a physical medium stance at that point. If you know anything about that, I'm not so sure I buy into all of it. But
well, the argument, I guess, that's been made is that, well, it's not disturbing the air molecules; it's interacting with the device itself. That it's picking up, let's say. Something electronic, right? So if it is indeed energy, it would interact with something that is like equals like, right? So it would interact with the device, not the environment.
But then I've got a bigger question that you can add on to that then. Because when we go in to investigate a location, especially a historical location, which is some of my favorite stuff, we've gone in, at this point, we've done the genealogy, we've done the historic research, so we're asking, we've got a list of questions based on the research we've done. So we're not going in blind. We know what we're asking. We know who we should be talking to by the people that maybe occupied the site. We're doing all of these things, and we're getting intelligent responses. So that's where we started drawing the line. When you can ask a question and get an intelligent response and not something random, that takes it to a new level of trying to understand, and that's where the quantum physics of it all started to really take off.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, okay. No, go ahead.
Well, I'm just wondering if you've dealt with the same thing where you can carry on. I mean, we almost have intelligent conversations in some of our investigations, and that's how we revealed history that was unknown before. So I'm just wondering if you've had the same interaction in your investigations.
I have to give that a big yes. I never talked about it much or wrote about it until 2019 when my last book came out, because I've always told people don't do the medium thing, and then with the stuff that happened to me, if I report, it looked like I was doing the medium thing, right? So it was... I have spoken with... actually, we better take our break, and we'll leave the suspense hanging until the end of the break.
Yes.
But you're listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON 1240 AM, 99.5 FM in New England's beautiful Blackstone River Valley. Be right back with our great guests, Pam Nance and Ashley Field, so stick with us.
The night is alive. Join us and take a walk on the weird side when you tune in to The Kingdom of Nye, hosted by Heather Wade. The the finest in late night talk. Listen live free weeknights starting at 9 p.m. Pacific Time at thekingdomofnye.com, talkstreamlive.com, and the Paranormal Radio app. Wanna take a ride?
Local and live at 99.5 FM.
And welcome back to WOON 1240 AM, 99.5 FM in the Blackstone River Valley, and it's Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno, two of our terrific guests today, Pam Nance and Ashley Field. We're talking good old-fashioned, but not so old-fashioned ghost hunting. So just to answer your question, Ashley, I certainly have had very similar experiences. In the book, you get to a certain age, you don't care what people think, so I wrote it, and there were a whole bunch of things. And I approached it in the chapter, What Ghosts Have to Say About God. Because with my theology background, people say, first I'm always being blamed for not embracing their religious beliefs. And secondly, they also think, well, you must believe this, and this, and about the afterlife and all this. Well, I haven't seen any of that. I have encountered people in what I believe are parallel realities. The first one, while I was doing pastoral work at a mental hospital. So here I am, sitting in a little room having conversations, and I was trying to keep my voice down because the last place you want to have them hear you talking to yourself is in a psychiatric ward, right? So anyway, I got through that, and it was a guy. Here's what happened. There was, because you're supposed to be the guest here, not me, but just very quickly. That particular hallway in St. Lawrence State Hospital in upstate New York was very strange. People didn't like working there. It was really odd stuff. They thought, I actually had the opinion that it was haunted. Well, a lady who was one of the patients there, she was more physically ill than anything else because it was a state hospital. She said, she was a medium, and there was a man who was waiting in the hallway. His wife apparently was a patient. She was going to die, and he was going to take her home. Quote. I said, and I was a pest in the seminary with my questions, and I was a pest in the paranormal to this day with my questions, and I said, I don't, that's not good enough. So I went and meditated just on a hunch, and much to my shock, I met a fellow named Gilbert who was across the St. Lawrence River at the railroad station in Prescott, Ontario, waiting for his wife, and he was going to take her home, which he got home from Montreal on the train. At the end of the conversation, I actually heard a diesel locomotive. And so naturally, if there was some kind of energy connection between those two sides of the river, not too hard to believe. And this woman was picking that up, and she interpreted it in the good old classic 19th century spiritualist way. And all my experiences have been with people in parallel worlds, sometimes that might be considered the future to us, which is why I always ask, and, anybody who is a regression therapist, do you sometimes encounter subjects who give you a date in the future or some date you don't recognize or describe some world you don't recognize? So, Pam, I might ask you that.
Well, we had an interesting EVP come through that sort of touches on that. I asked who won World War II and received the response Hitler.
Yeah, I get that all the time. Parallel all the timelines, alternate timelines. Yeah.
So we, that's the conclusion we came to, that in a parallel dimension or world, Hitler did win World War II. So that's the first thing that comes to mind.
Well, that's the quantum thing. I mean, in most interpretations, all possibilities, all outcomes really are out there somewhere in the multiverse. Some when, somewhere. Ben, you had another question?
Oh, well, you kind of beat me to it, but
that doesn't happen very often.
Well, kind of. It's interesting because you two work a lot in the historic realm, which is it's interesting that you come at it with this approach because it's not typical, right? Typically, it's like, I'm going to go to Valley Forge, or I'm going to go and I'm going to go to the I'm forgetting all my favorite my famous Civil War sites.
Well, these are just two exciting guests, and that's why we're doing so much talking. We shouldn't do that. We should let them.
No, but anyway. So the question is this, right? Because I'm going to appropriate this from Peter because he did have a third question we didn't get to, but it's also something I'm wondering as well, which is when it comes to doing EVPs or any sort of investigation, you've already alluded to this a little bit. Are there other historical differences you've encountered? Anything, just completely out of nowhere that you've experienced when investigating, a historic site or even a non-historic site?
The first thing that comes to my mind, we were in Lexington, Kentucky, attending a convention, and we were staying in a carriage house, a historic property. And, of course, we carry our equipment with us wherever we go. And before we left town that morning, we decided to conduct a short investigation. And upon review, rather than the typical EVPs that came through, it appeared they were investigating us. Ah. They were asking the same type questions that we ask. So it really appeared as though there were people or beings on the other side conducting a paranormal investigation of Ashley and I.
Who's investigating who?
Well, that's the thing. We're
exactly.
Constantly running into a quote-unquote ghosts who think we're ghosts haunting them. A lot of times they're afraid.
We've been told, we always ask, what do we look like to you? And they tell us dead people. You look dead.
Well, that's a backhanded compliment, I think.
Yeah, ghost.
My favorite. Pam asked what we look like, and we got the reply, not pretty, dead.
Well, we often find that they see us as we would see them across the membrane, as a physicist would say, of the parallel reality, which is charged with plasma. So you're going to look weird or distorted or glowing or something like that. So. Okay, why don't we move? I want to get to one listener question here before we continue, but this is from Michelle in Blackstone, Massachusetts. It's kind of general, but I think Pam and Ashley can get into it.
Sure thing. So Michelle writes to us, listening to your show for many years, this is the first time I'm writing in. Well, thank you. I was ghost hunting until I brought something home with me about 10 years ago. I wish I heard your advice about not ghost hunting before that happened. But I followed your advice and worked hard to make everything positive in my life and whatever it was left. My question is, why aren't more paranormal researchers using your ideas? I think they would get good results.
Okay, well, we hear that they are, but I mean, Pam and Ashley are using similar ideas. And what comes from this is, have you ever found a problem in people bringing something negative home, or more importantly, something that seemed to be positive and turned out to be negative? In a case,
we always get activity afterwards. That's pretty common. I know because Pam and I live, states apart. I'd stay with her, or she'd stay with me, and we'd always hear stuff the next day, and things would happen, but nothing negative. But we kind of theorized that it was never our intent to encounter anything like that. It was always our intent just to gather information for scientific purposes. And I don't know if that made a difference or not, but we are big believers in, if you look for it, you will find it.
Right. One of the things that really annoys the heck out of us is these provocative approaches to cases. I've even heard the term theological provocation, which it was Lorraine Warren used that, although never with me. I think it's like really dumb. Personally, and I think it doesn't further any sort of knowledge or positive communication. So I don't know what's your feeling on that. I mean, being provocative in order to supposedly stimulate phenomena.
Bad idea. I mean, that's just and it's kind of the easy way out. People see that in the TV shows. I'll provoke a spirit and get a response, and instead of doing, the work up front, learning about the population that has inhabited the site, and asking questions directly to them. We're all ready to talk about ourselves. Most people, enjoy telling other folks what they do and what their interests are. And I think the same thing is applicable to the other side. And I really think that adds another reason to the number of EVPs that we walk away with. We resonate with that population and the questions that we ask. We go in with this ethnographic kind of approach, wanting to learn about their daily life and the historical and cultural influences that affected them. And many of these sites, went through the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, a lot of trauma, a lot of, death and loss, and they're very willing to share their stories. Information about like their dietary components, their trade, their occupation, even the war. I mean, we've captured some really great EVP of cannon fire
Really? Yeah.
and musket fire and also songs in the cookhouse that Ashley referenced on the that had the evidence of a blockade. We captured a complete song and learned afterwards from a professor of music at the University of North Carolina at Wilmington that it was a song sung primarily by soldiers in the which war was it, Ashley? The
Mexican-American War.
Yeah.
Those are the guys that, when they came back, they became officers in the Civil War because they had the experience. And it was a song that they sang about boots in Mexico and things like that.
Them on boots ain't going to Mexico or something. And so we actually sent that audio clip to this professor, and he identified it as a popular song that was sang during the Mexican-American War.
On the one of the things too in your resume, and this is when we wish we had more than an hour, but are what we refer to as crossover phenomena. And I believe you know Kathleen Marden, I believe, right?
Yes.
From our conversation previously. And this is something that got Kathleen and us together, and Denise Stoner as well, on the issue of people having one form of phenomenon or other, and then somehow having something that's not generally associated with it. That they think they're being abducted by aliens, and all of a sudden they have poltergeist activity or haunting activity in their homes. Can you tell us a bit about your experience with crossover phenomena, things that may have you maybe started with ghosts and led you to UFOs or some other sort of phenomenon?
Well, in the first few years of investigating, the evidence was just so overwhelming that these were, interactive beings. We began asking, where are you? How do you come through? And rather than the historical feedback, we started getting EVPs that indicated an ET presence, that they were coming through a portal or a wormhole. And then we decided, hey, we'll just try to find out what planet they live on. And so they began telling us about their planet and the name and the location as far as a Stargate. And at that point, we realized, okay, we've gone beyond just this historical timeline, possibly into off-planet communication. And that led us to put together a presentation that overlapped the historical data with the quantum physics data. And we presented that in Atlanta in 2013 at DragonCon. And Stanton Friedman was in attendance at our presentation and really enjoyed the scientific approach and the quantum theory. And we had a nice visit with him afterwards. And he subsequently introduced us to Kathleen Marden because I think early on she experienced poltergeist activity in her home after the Betty and Barney Hill incident. Mm-hmm. And, sort of was approaching that, I think, in the beginning more in the paranormal realm, but of course branched out into the ET area of study. And so he felt that she would be a good person to communicate with, and we did. And we met with Kathleen and Denise Stoner in spring of 2015 to sort of showcase our methodology and some of our evidence. And we conducted an investigation at Denise's home to communicate with her father-in-law, and we actually picked up some really good information for her. But during the course of that visit, Kathleen suggested that we might benefit from investigating a location where a known abduction had occurred, a UFO ET abduction of an individual. And that site is in North Carolina and was easy for Ashley and I to get to. So we visited down east about mid-2015 and conducted our first sort of ET investigation.
Okay. Now, we have a question from Richard Eno, and how many Enos can there be, right?
Yeah.
In Northern California, who was a cousin of ours and a guest co-host of the show. And this leads into something, it must be an Eno thing. I was just thinking of this very question.
How many Enos does it take to run a talk show? I guess the answer is 3. So Richard writes to us, do you ever have EVPs or hear voices that speak in languages you do not understand?
Now, before you answer that, I have that all the time. They're beings who are nonverbal. You encounter them at the intersect points and things like that. So, go ahead. I'd be interested in hearing whether you have the same experience.
Yes. We have some African dialect language that came out of a basement, not at Moon River. I live in Savannah, so not at Moon River, but down the block. I had access to another building and another location. We have French from the Hanover House, which is a plantation house that was relocated from the plantation belt outside of Charleston to Clemson's campus. Pam, do you remember any more?
We also picked up African chanting out of the cookhouse where the Union blockade was set up. And so I guess the African chanting and the French Huguenot are the two that stand out.
Yeah, that's us. Our ancestors were Huguenots, the Enos. Anyway, whatever.
We did get, remember the really weird noise that we would get occasionally? And the way I can describe it the best, do you remember the movie Predator? And do you remember the clicking noise it made in the tree?
Oh, yeah. Of course.
Yeah.
Numerous sites that we kept, and we kind of grouped them together, but we have that weird clicky noise from numerous sites we've investigated.
Interesting. Wow. Well, we've had, all kinds of languages, some of which I didn't know, forms of languages like Latin that took me 3 days to work out in an attic in near Buffalo, New York, with a bear-like creature. I mean, you name it. It seems to be out there. So here's the $64,000 question that anybody as old as me would recognize from an old TV show. How do you know, or how do we know that we're picking up on EVPs or whatever is producing it is not lying? That it's really what it says it is?
I don't think you always can, because we have a whole run of I'm the devil, get out, things like that, that we just kind of categorized into one folder and found it kind of humorous. But the I'm the devil one's probably the funniest one we got, because I highly doubt it. I highly doubt it.
Well, we had there's one case it was one of Ben's first cases starting in 2005, and it was the famous Flap area case in central Connecticut that we're always talking about. And the owner of the house where we started this case has hours and hours and hours and hours over nearly 60 years of EVPs, electronic voice phenomena, many of which seem to be just simply historical situations, because the house had been in 1793 a general store, and then became a private home, and no other family has ever lived in this home. There's 6 generations of the family, and that was the start of our first flap area case, which now covers about 330 square miles. But we take EVPs seriously, but kind of with a grain of salt, as we do any evidence, photos, things of that kind. So my next question: do you use photography a lot in your cases?
Yes.
Okay.
We run video cameras, and we use digital cameras as we investigate. And I actually rip the audio from the video. I actually rip it off, separate it out, and I analyze that as well. Okay. Because there were issues with that too. Maybe I remember in my early days they didn't have any digital photographic media, and you'd be able to look at the negative and all this sort of thing. And photo labs could say maybe this is a reflection, maybe not. But there's really no way to tell exactly. And then of course today with the orbs, we didn't get those as much with non-digital media as they do today, and because digital media will interpret, and you could get dust or whatever. So I'm sure you sort of take precautions to avoid any sort of misinterpretation. I would think. I'm sure you do it at your level of work.
Right. We don't put a whole lot of stock into the orb thing because it can be dust or light anomalies and just too many other factors that can come into play. We have, I'd say, about probably a handful of really good pieces of photographic evidence that clearly show, full body apparition that there's just no explaining away, as far as being some type of camera anomaly or light, interference. These are actually figures. But I'd say the bulk of our evidence is captured by EVP. And we just have some really great stuff there.
Okay. Well, I guess to kind of wrap this all up with a bow, you two have presented to dozens of professionals, whether it's student groups, anything like that, the Ryan Research Center, and all of those places. With all of your work, how has academia reacted to all of it?
Really quite open, surprisingly enough. We, as you said, we presented on the campus of Duke University to a packed house. We were overwhelmed afterwards with questions and feedback, and we also did work on the campus of Clemson University. The faculty and staff, welcomed us and were very open to our methodology. As far as non-academia but professional group would be Santee Cooper Utility Company, particularly in South Carolina. We investigated a couple of their historic pieces of property and had the board of directors at our presentations, which included, parts of the governorship of South Carolina, and that's subsequently where we filmed our documentary at one of those locations. So, professional people have been very open to the scientific approach. I think they appreciate, the science that we provided behind the evidence.
Mm-hmm. Oh, very good. So you're going to become active again, and tell people, if you would, please, where they can find out more about you, the YouTube channel, etc.
Well, the YouTube channel is under my name, A.S. Field, and that's all we have right this second. We are actually working towards this.
Ashley, is the Spirit Hunter U.S. YouTube channel still up and running?
I don't think that's valid anymore.
Okay.
I just moved it over into my name when we went on hiatus.
Well, keep us posted. We'll give you some plugs.
Yeah,
when the
yeah.
time
we'll
is right.
let
Yeah.
you know.
Okay, very good. All right, so I think we have covered all we can in one show. I think we're going to have Pam and Ashley back as soon as possible. I'd like to get into a number.
I know.
of
There's so many areas we haven't touched on.
So many areas, and you worked in so many areas, and just congratulations on what you've accomplished, and for the open-minded approach. And we'll talk to you very soon.
Thank you for having us. It was our pleasure.
It was a great pleasure.
We'd love to come back.
Hey,
yeah, absolutely. Well, hopefully it won't take as long as...
Yeah, exactly.
Good. So be well.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, Ben, we'll take away our announcements here. And
Sure thing. So, if I can find the correct page, and I did, organizers are forging bravely ahead with plans for an in-person New England Parafest on April 10th and 11th in Kittery, Maine. We plan to be there on both days, and we will do a live broadcast of this show from there on Sunday at noon. Then we are scheduled to speak that afternoon at 3:15. Other speakers will include Shane Searway, of course, Andy Kitt, Denise Stone, or Dennis Stone. Dennis Stone. There we go. Now we're talking about Denise
different
Stoner.
person.
It's so many people. So Nomar Slovic as well, the Connecticut Paranormal Research Team, Kristen Evans, Dave McCullough, Lynn Nickerson, Tom D'Agostino, and Paul Gillis. You can check out Facebook, New England Parafest 2021.
I never heard of Paul Gillis. I'll bet that's Nathaniel Gillis.
Yeah, we gotta change that.
Who writes these scripts?
Anyway,
the amazing Valerie Lofaso, an empathic medium who is also a UFO researcher, has joined our stable of co-authors for our new book, Behind the Paranormal 3, Uneasy Skies. Also contributing will be Shane Searway, a well-known guest co-host here, Alexander Petikoff as well. The book will also contain the best of our interviews over the years with the greatest researchers in the UFO field, one of whom came up today, Stanton Friedman, as well as some of our own experiences. Look for the book released toward the end of this year.
And you can check out our current books along with all of those of all of our co-hosts at our show website, BehindTheParanormal.com, where you can also find out more about the show, our many cases over the years, our public appearances, and how to book us, along with some of our 900-plus free recorded shows from our 12-plus years on the air, including our 4.5-year run on CBS Radio, along with special shows and podcasts.
Now, after a long period of, I suppose you could call it technical issues with our website and attacks, apparently, we've reloaded recorded shows into the archives at BehindTheParanormal.com back to 2009. One more year to go, and a lot of special shows as well. There'll be over 1,000 hours once we finally get it done, hopefully within the next few weeks. Past shows back to late 2009 are also available on major podcast platforms, YouTube, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, the Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live, where you're listening to us now, some of you, and more. There are several links also to charities we have adopted on the show, including USACares.org, Canadian Veterans Advocacy, Helping Haiti's Orphans, that's my favorite, a Youth Mentoring Connection in Los Angeles, doing great things for at-risk youth out there, the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation of America, and the Sisterhood of Ground Zero, along with the Milk Fund here in Northern Rhode Island. Now, we know all the people personally who run these charities, and when you donate to them, it goes where it should. So what's in store for next week, Ben?
So next week, it'll be the last day of January 31st. We will take a look at some dramatic but little-known UFO events in Warwickshire, England, in the 1920s that local people actually thought were ghosts. Hey, we're really keeping with the trend. Our guest will be British police detective Richard Rokeby.
Now, we're not going to be able to have him on Skype in the video. We'll just have some illustrations of his books because, excuse me, being an active police detective, his image cannot be shown.
Yes.
So that's going to be rather dramatic, but we will just give you, you're not going to get to see his pretty face. You're just going to see his pretty book.
Hey, that's why we have backups and other things like images.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And I had never heard of this case. And it's really quite dramatic. So I'm looking forward to this show. It's going to be really just as exciting as today's, I'm sure. So we leave you today with a thought from that 19th century American sweetheart, Ralph Waldo Emerson, sort of cousin of ours, actually. Adopt the pace of nature. Her secret is patience.
Yes. Yes, indeed. Well, I guess, when in doubt, be patient.
Yeah.
And really all we
Even
can
when
do-
you're not in doubt, be patient.
Yes, exactly.
So anyway, I'm Paul Eno.
And I'm Ben Eno. And thanks for joining us on our great cosmic journey. And we shall see you next time on Behind the Paranormal.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.